Welcome to Fantasia, home of the Melodious. My name's Azallea, and today, gonna be bringing you guys another update to my Windwitch deck. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into this. So starting off, we are playing 3 copies of Windwitch Ice Spell. So Ice Spell is, of course, the centerpiece of the deck, being able to special summon itself from the hand when you control no monsters, and being able to special summon another Windwitch monster straight from your deck to your side of the field after that. So that's always just a fantastic card to open up with. So the card that you're typically going to be summoning out with your Ice Spell is going to be Windwitch Glass Bell, which we're playing 3 copies of. So Windwitch Glass Bell is the searcher for the deck, so if she is normal or special summoned, you can actually add 1 Windwitch monster from your deck to your hand, which is very nice. And the card that you're going to be adding with your Glass Bell is typically going to be a copy of Windwitch Snowbell, which we're playing 2 copies of. So we're playing 2 copies of Snowbell because of the fact that this deck revolves more around the Windwitches than anything else. So being able to make a follow-up Crystal Wing if anything happens to your first one is very, very important. And Snowbell has the amazing effect where if you control 2 or more wind monsters and no non-wind monsters, you can special summon this card straight from your hand, and a wind synchro monster that was summoned using this card as a synchro material cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effect. So Snowbell is fantastic for basically giving your Crystal Wing some built-in protection. So Glass Bell and Snowbell are both tuners, and Ice Bell is of course not, so it's very easy for you to go Ice Bell, Glass Bell into a Synchro 7, and then using the Synchro 7 with your Snowbell to go into Crystal Wing or whatever other Synchro monster that you would want. So the only problem is that Windwitches don't really work too well with Link monsters, mostly because of the fact that Ice Bell restricts you to summoning level 5 or higher Wind-type monsters from your extra deck during the turn you activate her effect. So that basically restricts you from summoning Link monsters because, of course, Link monsters do not have levels. But we do have ways to go into some Link monsters, and I'll get into that when we get there. But anyway, we're going to move on and go into some of the other supporting archetypes that help out the Windwitches when we don't consistently open up with our Ice Spell. So the first card is going to be 1 copy of Speedroid Terratop. So Terratop, very infamous for its usage in rank 3 decks back in the day, especially in Zodiac format as well, where you used it to get out MX Saber Invoker and stuff. But in this deck, Terratop actually acts as a very powerful monster because it helps us tutor out the Speedroid Takatomborg straight from our deck. So we are playing 3 copies of Speedroid Takatomborg. The reverse ratios of what people typically run of 3 Terratops, 1 Takatomborg. So because Terratop is limited, and it is a searcher, so we're playing 3 copies of Takatomborg to make up for that. You kind of want to see Takatomborg. Terratop is really only there for the consistency, being able to search this card out. So with Takatomborg, if you control a wind monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and you it has an effect where you contribute it to summon a Speedroid tuner from your deck, but we're not playing any Speedroid tuners. We're strictly using Takatomborg as a level 3 monster that you can easily use to summon to your side of the field. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because Takatomborg with Windwitch Glass Bell is another way that you can access Crystal Wing. So if you normal summon your Windwitch Glass Bell, you can search out a copy of Snowbell, the level 1 tuner. You can special summon the Takatomborg from your hand, and then special summon the Snowbell from your hand because you control 2 wind attribute monsters. You can go into your Synchro 7 and then climb into your Crystal Wing by synchroing your Synchro 7 with your Snowbell. So this is another way for us to access our Crystal Wing. It adds some consistency to the deck, and it makes it still a little bit more themed around the Windwitches, having of course to rely on Glass Bell for those interactions. But Speedroid Terratop is also a fantastic card. It allows you to access a few rank 3 monsters, especially if you don't have the most optimal opening hand. Things like Totem Bird and stuff like that are very, very powerful cards, especially when backed up with a lot of back row, which this deck runs. So anyway, that is it for the Windwitches and the Speedroids. It's just a mini engine that's following up and synergizing with the Windwitches, essentially. So next off, we're going to go into the next engine that we play, which is going to be the Spellbook engine. So we're running 2 copies of Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, and I'm going to get into the spell cards later, but we also run Spellbook of Secrets and Spellbook of Knowledge, and that's mostly because of the fact that, well, of course, Spellbook Magician of Prophecy is a spellcaster, but all of our Windwitches are also spellcasters. So if we don't open optimally, one of the best things that you can do is actually normal summon your Glass Belle, search out a copy of your Windwitch Ice Belle, and then use your Spellbook of Knowledge to go ahead and send your Glass Belle from the field to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. So it helps you draw into your back row, into some of your more combo, pieces, and it also clears out your side of the field so that next turn you can go ahead and activate Windwitch Glass Belle or Ice Belle's effect from your hand to go and make your Crystal Wing. So that's why this card is here. It's just here for the normal summon. It adds some extra consistency because the only other card that we actually really normal summon in the deck is going to be Glass Belle, because Terra Top can also summon itself from the hand if you control no monsters. So there's that. Alright, so that does it for most of the monsters, actually. We're just going to cap off this with some hand traps. So we were playing 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, one of the best hand traps in the game right now. Hits very important cards, field spells, combo pieces, opponent's monsters that activate on the field, and things like that. Can even hit Pendulum Scales and Continuous Spell and Traps, which is pretty nice. If you have Ash Blossoms, of course, feel free to play those. I just don't have them for obvious purposes. Okay. So next card we play is going to be 1 copy of Maxi, and Maxi, of course, is just amazing for helping you generate advantage. This deck likes to go first, but if your opponent's going second, they have to try to commit to the board to try to get rid of your Crystal Wing, to try to play through your back row, and if you have that Maxi in your hand, you're really going to be shutting your opponent down, and it puts you in a really strong position. So yeah, anyway, that caps off all of the monsters. Next up, we're going to go into the spell cards. Okay, so for the spell cards, starting off, we are playing 2 copies of Spellbook of Secrets. Now, Spellbook of Secrets is probably going to be the main card that you're searching off of your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. This card can actually search Spellbook Magician of Prophecy if you haven't used your normal summon yet and you just want to thin out your deck. So they can search each other, it's completely fine. And of course, once you have one of these, the cards that you really want to end up searching is going to be one of these 3 copies of Spellbook of Knowledge. And Knowledge is the card where you can just send to the graveyard either one spellcast type monster you control or one other spellbook card from your hand or face up on your side of the field, except another copy of Spellbook of Knowledge, of course, and if you do, you draw 2 cards. So this is like a pot of greed, essentially. It turns your either Spellbook of Secrets or your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy into a pot of greed at the cost of like your normal summon, but that's really fine, especially because the fact that this deck doesn't really utilize a normal summon too much. So it's definitely a really good card. It ups the consistency a ton, helps us dig for our monsters and our back row. Okay, the next card that we play is going to be 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. Fantastic back row removal, and I like the fact that it banishes instead of just destroying, because against certain matchups like Pendulum Magicians, where they can easily play around your Crystal Wing by using the effects of their Pendulum Scales or using the effects of their continuous trap cards, Cosmic Cyclone is just fantastic, removes those monsters from the game, just hits those back row that are very important for them in terms of removing your Crystal Wing from your side of the field, and it makes it so that your opponent cannot pendulum some of those monsters back and reuse them later on in the duel. This deck does like to grind out the game quite a bit, especially because we're mostly relying on a single boss monster most of the time to kind of control the field and all that good stuff. So being able to limit your opponent's resources later on in the duel is definitely a good way to approach the game. Alright, so moving on, we're also playing 2 copies of Scapegoat. Cut this down from 3 from last time when I did this profile, the last one being the Artifact Spellbook Windwitch deck profile. Because the fact that I saw a little too much, I think 2 is the perfect number for Scapegoat, especially because this deck doesn't really want to go into link monsters too much, although there are some situations where you can actually just get rid of your Crystal Wing, because you can link with your Crystal Wing and a couple of your Scapegoat tokens, make something like Gaia Saber, and then go from there. And I can explain that when we get into the trap cards, because then it'll make a little bit more sense why we're going to get rid of our Crystal Wing. So yeah, 2 copies of Scapegoat is fantastic. It also helps you, soak up some potential damage if you're really lacking monsters and you need some defensive capabilities. Also, if you don't have enough monsters on your side of the field, you can always have the Scapegoat out, and you can go into some link monsters on your turn, assuming you flip this on your opponent's end phase, and it allows you to go for some link monsters, put some body on the field, and allows you to actually swing for some damage and have some board presence while you're setting up for your other plays. And to cap off these spell cards, we're just playing 1 copy of Raigeki to clear the field out. This deck likes to go first, but in the cases of where you're going second, or if your opponent just has a really strong board, Raigeki just clears things out, and it allows you to swing for game because of the fact that you can easily clear out the board, you're mostly relying on one boss monster on your side of the field. So, you know, if your opponent just continuously sets a monster, like special summons 1 or 2 monsters every single turn, you're going to have a difficult time getting through that. So yeah, that's why that is there. That does it for the spell cards. Next off, we're going to go into the trap cards. Alright, so for the trap cards, starting off, we were playing 3 copies of Storming Mirror Force. Switch this out from Drowning from last time because we're not really too reliant on things like artifacts and things that play on our opponent's turn now. This is more of a, you're focusing more on making plays on your own turn, minus of course the scapegoats. So this is really nice because we try to maintain our board presence in this deck. So having Storming Mirror Force, if your opponent's trying to, you know, bait it out your Crystal Wings, negation effects, swarm the field as the big boss monsters and things like that. This is a fantastic way of protecting your board. A great example is against decks like Dinosaurs, where they summon like Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, they flip your Crystal Wing face down, they're trying to attack and get rid of it and clear your board out. Storm Mirror Force is just a fantastic way of stopping that, and just returning all of your opponent's stuff back to their hand. Drowning, of course, required you to have no monster on your side of the field, so it synergized well with things like artifacts, but not so much in this deck where we're focusing more on the Windwitches, more on the Speedroids, and things like that. So, switch to Storm Mirror Force, really like the synergy so far, and it's working pretty well. So the next card that I'm playing is going to be 2 copies of Back to the Front. Now, I absolutely love this card. It's a shame that you have to summon the monster in defense position, but I can understand why they did that, otherwise you could bring back Link monsters. But Back to the Front is just so good, because the fact that you can just activate Scapegoat on your opponent's end phase, you can go ahead and link away with your Crystal Wing and some of your Scapegoat tokens, you know, make Gaia Saber, make Proxy Dragon, whatever you need to put more bodies on the field, more damage on the field, and then you can always use Back to the Front and bring back your Crystal Wing. Even if you don't want to get rid of your Crystal Wing, you probably use something like Winter Belle or your Clear Wing Synchro Dragon to synchro up into your Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, and you can use Back to the Front, bring back the Clear Wing. Clear Wing adds additional negation to your side of the field, protects your Crystal Wing from things that target, and all that good stuff. So Back to the Front has actually been very, very nice, especially because, like I mentioned earlier, we revolve around protecting a single boss monster, but Back to the Front makes it so that we have, you know, more than one monster that we're investing all our resources into. So it's definitely a fantastic card. I'd recommend giving it a shot. I think 2 is fine. If you want to play 3, you can test it out, but you don't really want to see it too early on in the game. You just kind of want to have it as backup. So there's that. Okay, so the next card that I'm playing is going to be 2 copies of Lost Wind, and the reason why I'm playing Lost Wind in here is because the fact that it cuts your opponent's monster's attack in half, and that is very important because the fact that sometimes we're actually going to not necessarily get our Crystal Wing out. You know, you might be under the effects of Max C, you might your opponent might be like negating your play, stopping some of your summons, and Lost Wind just makes it so things like Glass Bell can actually attack over things, or if your opponent is attacking into your Glass Bell, you can basically destroy that opponent's monster in battle. Lost Wind is so good because it also negates the effects of monsters, so I think the main problem this deck had in testing was just relying way too much on Solemn Strike to negate monsters' effects, especially things like, I've been mentioning Dinosaurs a lot because I don't know why, every time I play online with this deck I just run into Dinosaurs, but Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, things like that. It's good against, you know, Magicians, Trickstars, it's good against so many different decks, and of course you can always recycle this by setting it from your graveyard back to your side of the field if your opponent ever goes for an extra deck summon. So because Link summoning is very prevalent, you know, you're going to be getting your value out of this card. 2 copies is enough because, like I said, it always comes back if your opponent special summons something from the extra deck, so you don't need any more than that. And in conjunction with it, we're also playing 3 copies of Solemn Strike. It's fantastic, it's really powerful. I usually use this to negate summons instead of monster effects because I have the Lost Wind now in this deck and it's been working really well, but 3 strikes is just great to prevent your opponent from basically establishing too powerful of a field for them to overcome yours. And then last but not least, I play 1 copy of Solemn Warning. Stopping those summons is very important, especially for like big, powerful boss monsters, Borreload Dragon, Firewall Dragons. Stop those combos, stop those loops. Warning is just amazing overall. Alright, so that does it for the trap cards, and that does it for the main deck. So next off, we're going to go into the side deck. Okay, so for the side deck, starting off, we are playing 3 copies of Artifact Scythe. So I know I removed this Artifact engine from my main deck compared to my last deck profile on this, but I found that, you know, having access to it in certain matchups actually is pretty good. So I just like having the Artifact engine in this deck. It synergizes well with the way the deck plays. You summon a Crystal Wing out, your opponent's trying to bait out its effects, and then your opponent tries to go for extra deck summons, and you can just completely lock them out by summoning Scythe to your side of the field during their turn. And of course, in conjunction to Artifact Scythe, just to add some versatility to the Artifact engine, I play 1 copy of Artifact Moral Talk. And Moral Talk allows you to destroy things on the field, and it doesn't target. So that's also a very nice niche that it has. And the last monsters that I actually ended up siding through testing was the Godarla. So 2 copies of Godarla, the Mystery Dust Kaiju. And I found that in certain matchups where your opponent also summons like a big boss monster, things like Masterpiece and things like that, True Drakers are still running around, surprisingly. So Godarla is fantastic for just removing those monsters, and then you can go through your plays unhindered. So I found it to be really nice. I'm using Godarla because the fact that Ice Spell actually restricts you to summoning wind monsters during that turn, and Godarla is a wind attribute kaiju, so that way it doesn't conflict with our wind witches. We can tribute over something our opponent has, and then go for an ice spell play with no problems. So yeah, next off we're going to move into some of these spells and traps that I side. I side 1 copy of Dark Hole, and this is really because if you're playing Wind Witches, people don't want you to go first. They don't want you to summon that Crystal Wing, so they're probably going to go first, and siding in the Dark Hole in conjunction with the Raigeki in the main deck, just a great way to clear out very oppressive boards, especially since they know you're playing Wind Witches, which are fairly easy to disrupt, if I'm going to be honest. Having a way to clear out your opponent's board and kind of take a few turns to kind of recover and establish your own field is going to be very nice. Okay, so for the trap cards, of course, we have to play 3 copies of Artifact Sanctum. You're playing Artifact Scythe and Moral Talk. You have to play Sanctum to tutor them out from your deck. So Artifact Sanctum is also fantastic because you're playing so much back row that your opponent's probably at least in game 2, they're probably not going to expect you to have Sanctum in your back row because you're not playing them in your main deck, and most people aren't playing the artifacts at all in the current format. So having this set in your back row, if your opponent's trying to, you know, blow up your Storm Mirror Forces or things like that, they might accidentally hit the Sanctum, and if Sanctum gets destroyed by your opponent's card effect, you can actually destroy a card on your opponent's side of the field. So you get a lot of value out of it, especially if you're chaining it to that effect and chaining it to the destruction of this card and, you know, summoning Scythe or Moral Talk. So you can potentially get 2 pops, or you can get a pop and you can lock your opponent out of the extra deck for the rest of the turn. So amazing value out of the deck. Or out of the card. Anyway, so moving on, we were playing 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance, and this deck, it does play quite a bit of spells in the main deck, but you can always side those out very, very easily. You know, the deck doesn't rely on Scapegoat. The deck doesn't need Cosmic Cyclones if your opponent's not playing too much back row. So against Pendulum decks, things like that, Anti-Spell Fragrance, you can easily lock them out of the game. Fantastic card, especially for those combo-oriented decks that don't play a lot of trap cards. They're mostly relying on heavy on monsters or heavy on spells. Anti-Spell Fragrance is fantastic for that as well. And even though we run the Spellbook engine in our main deck, you're typically going to be using the Spellbook engine to draw into things like your side deck cards. And after that, you know, after your turn, you can just set the Anti-Spell Fragrance on your opponent's turn, you flip it up, you kind of slow your opponents down, and you can very easily just play around that. When you search out your Spellbook of Secrets or whatever, you just set it, you can activate it next turn. You're usually not in desperate need of draw power after you've like established your Crystal Wing and like 1 or 2 back row. So that's why it's very nice in the deck. It doesn't conflict very much, and it helps you more than it hurts you. So that's why it's in there. And of course, last but not least, I'm playing 2 copies of Dimensional Barrier, this disgusting card that I absolutely hate, but hey, it's still legal, so why not play it? This is like a catch-all type of side deck card. Hits, you know, rituals, fusions, synchros, XYZs, all that good stuff, and it's just disgusting, so why not play it, right? Of course, you're probably not going to be calling synchros because that's what your deck's mostly based on, but hey, it can shut down a lot of different archetypes and playstyles. So yeah, that does it for the side deck, and next off, we're going to go into the extra deck. Okay, so for the extra deck, starting off, we are playing one copy of Link Spider. So Link Spider is here because of the fact that you can easily summon it with one of your Scapegoat tokens. So if you had an empty field and during your opponent's end phase you activated Scapegoat, Link Spider is actually one of the easiest monsters that you can summon. Just summoning it into your extra monster zone, it opens up the bottom zone under it, and then under that you can easily summon something like your Proxy Dragon using two of your other Scapegoat tokens, which opens up two more zones, and then using Link Spider and Proxy Dragon you can climb into a various other Link monsters. And another way that you can actually use your tokens is with Ib, the World Chalice Priestess. So Ib requires two monsters with different types and attributes, and your Scapegoat tokens are going to be Earth and Beast. But because all of our main deck monsters are basically spellcasters, and then we also have a variety of like wind and water attributes depending on, you know, Windwitches and Speedroids versus your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. And also because our side deck contains things like Light Fairies in terms of Artifact Scythe and Artifact Moral Talk, it's going to be fairly easy to summon Ib. And Ib is just another way for you to access, you know, left and right markers, which came up quite a bit in testing, just because of the fact that Link Spider and Proxy Dragon can be used to summon something like your Decode Talker. And Decode Talker is just really good in the deck because of the fact that it can protect your back row as well as your extra deck monsters from just targeting effects. So, you know, your opponent's probably going to side in Twin Twisters to deal with your back row, things like that. Decode Talker is just a way for us to kind of play around that. And on a similar note with Proxy Dragon and Ib, they're really good because of the fact that we play back to the front, which means we're going to be summoning back our Crystal Wing from our graveyard, and it's going to lose its protection from Snowbell, so it can still be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. If you summon Crystal Wing next to Ib, you can actually destroy Ib instead of Crystal Wing whenever a card effect that would destroy Crystal Wing would be activated. So something like Raigeki and things like that, Ib can actually save your Crystal Wing. Same with Proxy Dragon, although Proxy Dragon works the reverse way. It protects the cards on your side of the field by attributing something that Proxy Dragon points to instead. So, you know, if Proxy Dragon's pointing to another Scapegoat token, your opponent's trying to use Raigeki Break, for example, on your Crystal Wing, you can destroy the token instead. So there are just a few nice ways to help you protect your Crystal Wing. It's kind of niche in its applications. It doesn't come up too often, but when it does, you're definitely going to be thankful that you're playing these cards. Okay, so moving on to some of the other monsters that we play, we're playing one copy of Gaia Saber, the Lightning Shadow. And I love Gaia Saber because of the fact that it helps you clear out your extra monster zones. If you have a Clear Wing or Crystal Wing, whatever boss monster you have in your extra monster zone, you can activate Scapegoat during your opponent's end phase, and then using two of the tokens and your Crystal Wing, you can actually make the Gaia Saber. And Gaia Saber has a down link marker so that you can, under the Gaia Saber, because you have two more Scapegoat tokens remaining, you can summon Proxy Dragon right under it, opens up two extra monster zones so you can go and summon your monsters to it. It's just very versatile card, and I just like it because sometimes you're going to be stuck with like a totem bird or something like that inside your extra monster zone. You just can't get rid of it, so you can't summon your Crystal Wing, you can't do what you want to do. So this is a great way to kind of play around that. It's also a really nice beat stick with 2600 attack. It's above the 2500 attack threshold, so it can attack over a pretty good amount of monsters. So that's kind of nice as well. Now, the last Link monster that I play is going to be one copy of Borolo Dragon, and Borolo Dragon is just absolutely amazing because of the fact that it can't be targeted by either player's monster effects, so your opponent really has to rely on things that just like mass removal, blanket destruction, dark hole, Raigeki, and things like that to get rid of it. It's just so good. It can steal your opponent's monsters. You can use those monsters to not only attack your opponent with, but you can also link away with it as well, which is very nice. And yeah, Borolo is just a fantastic card overall. Anyway, that does it for our Link monsters. Next off, we're going to go ahead into the XYZs. Okay, so for the XYZ, starting off, we're playing one copy of Totem Bird. Now, Totem Bird requires two level 3 wind monsters, and it's fairly easy to summon with our Speedroids. So we have Terratop and Takaton Borg. If you special or normal summon your Terratop, you can easily search out the Takaton Borg, and because you control the Terratop, you can easily summon the Takaton Borg to your side of the field, overlay them for your Totem Bird. Normally, you're going to make this mid to late game, where you already have, you know, your Link Spider or Proxy Dragon, something else already established on your side of the field. This just adds another layer of negation that your opponent has to play around. Of course, Crystal Wing being the one that can negate monster effects. Now you have Totem Bird that can negate a spell or trap card. So it's fairly useful overall, especially if your opponent has like 1 or 2 set back row. It really like puts them in a corner and like puts a lot of pressure on them to try to get rid of this card, or they just go -1 in terms of trying to bait out Totem Bird's negation, and then potentially just opening up themselves to a lot of damage, because you can just swarm the field with link monsters, and you have beat sticks such as Crystal Wing, Clear Wing, and stuff like that to follow it up. On a similar note, we're also playing 1 copy of the Phantom Knights of Breaksword. This is really just toolboxing utility that this deck has. The one thing I like about Breaksword is that it can actually clear itself out from the extra monster zone. So if you summon Breaksword, you can target itself and 1 card your opponent controls and just destroy them. You don't have to do that. You can target one of your own back rows instead. You know, maybe you have a spare anti-spell fragrance that you just want to get rid of. Sure, you can just target your anti-spell fragrance, target something your opponent controls, get rid of it, all that good stuff. It's also 2000 attack, which is a pretty decent amount for a rank 3 monster, and it's just there for utility, toolboxing purposes. You're not always going to summon it, but it's always nice to have. So yeah, that does it for the XYZs. Next off, we're going to go into the Synchros. Okay, so for the Synchros, we're starting off with 1 copy of Stardust Charge Warrior. And Stardust Charge Warrior is pretty decent overall. I mean, if you Synchro summon this card, you can draw 1 card. It's pretty nice, and it can attack all special summon monsters your opponent controls once each. So if your opponent's like trying to save themselves with flipping something like Scapegoat during the battle phase, your Stardust Charge Warrior can easily just clear all of them out, and you're still going to be able to go straight for your opponent's life points after that with any other monsters you have. So pretty decent card. Fairly easy to summon. You don't really summon it too often, but when you do, it does what it needs to do. Okay, so next card that I play is 1 copy of Windwitch Winterbelle. Windwitch Winterbelle is just one of the cards that we use to easily climb into a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, and you know, the effect that it has doesn't really come up too much, especially the burn effect. The burn effect, people are tempted to use it. More often than not, you might want to skip it, because if your opponent has something like Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit in their hand, they're going to hit this card, and then you're just going to be stuck with a Snowbell on your side of the field that you can't use to synchro with anything. So this is just a card that you kind of just summon out, you synchro it with your Snowbell, you make a Crystal Wing that can't be destroyed by card effects, and it's pretty nice. You can of course always revive this back from your graveyard with something like Back to the Front, and then you can use it as a beat stick, use it, and then after that you can actually kind of use her effect, where during the battle phase you can special summon a monster from your hand that's lower level than itself, so it's not that bad overall. The other card that we play that's going to be a little bit more useful to bring back with Back to the Front is going to be Clear Wing Synchro Dragon, and I typically don't use the Clear Wing as much as I use the Winterbelle, but Clear Wing's really good against certain matchups, where like if you're playing against something like, for example, ABC, where they have ABC Dragon Buster already on their side of the field, most of them try to like wait and hold off on the ABC Dragon Buster's effect. They're not going to banish your Windwitch monsters. They're really waiting for you to summon things like Winterbelle, and then trying to banish your Winterbelle, so that you lose a ton of advantage and a ton of potential in terms of what you can make with the remaining monster on your side of the field. But if you summon your Clear Wing Synchro Dragon to your side of the field, it has built-in protection. It can negate the effects of a level 5 or higher monster your opponent controls that tries to activate an effect, or you could use its other effect, which is if your opponent tries to target a level 5 or higher monster that you control, you can negate that activation, destroy it as well. So it can just easily bypass things like ABC Dragon Buster, allows you to climb into your Crystal Wing, and by that time, you know, your opponent's going to be very in a very bad position. So Clear Wing has its niche use, and it's actually pretty nice, especially if you, like I mentioned earlier, you can bring it back with Back to the Front. So if you control a Crystal Wing and now you control Clear Wing, it's going to be very hard for your opponent to get over your field. Okay, so the next card that I play is going to be 1 copy of Stardust Dragon. Stardust Dragon doesn't really come up too often, but if you are relying a lot on your back row, for instance, like Anti-Spell Fragrance, you might want to consider making Stardust instead of something like Crystal Wing. Maybe your back row is just locking your opponent out already. You just need something to protect your back row. Make sure that you have it on your side of the field to control the duel with. This is an option that you can easily go for. And of course, we're also playing 2 copies of Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, the star of the show, the cards that the Windwitches and the Speedroids go for most of the time. Fantastic card, really doesn't need any more explanation. And the last card that I run in the extra deck is going to be 1 copy of Mistworm. I just like this card as a tech. It's pretty interesting because you can use, your Ice Spell, summon your Glass Spell from your deck. Glass Spell can search for whatever you want to, and then you can normal summon your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, and with your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, you can synchro with your Ice Spell and Glass Spell for this level 9 synchro of Mistworm. You can target 3 cards your opponent controls and return those targets to the hand. So, if they have 3 monsters that you just want to easily get rid of and just, attack for game, 2,500 is pretty good amount of damage overall. So, definitely not that bad. In testing, it hasn't really come up. You can remove it if you want to. I just like it there for the utility. It's like one of those toolbox cards that you'll kind of, in the situations where you use it, you're very glad that you have it to be able to use it. So, yeah, anyway, that does it for the extra deck, and that does it for this deck profile. So, thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please leave a like, subscribe for more Windwitch content, and leave a comment down below letting me know what I can do to improve. And until next time, take care.